noches, mi amor. Que descanses bien.
Igual tú. Buenas noches, mamá.
Early morning on December 23rd, 1972, there was a big earthquake in Nicaragua. It killed about 10,000 people. At that time, I was 9 years old.
¡Reina! ¡Reina! ¡Reina, hija, ¿dónde está? Hija. Tranquila, ya voy a pasar.
I saw one of our neighbors taking care of my baby sister. And then they went back to look for my brother. They took him out, but he was already dead. It was a very difficult time for us. Our house was totally destroyed. But at the same time, we received so much help. I remember being there that night, and just like an hour after, I cannot even remember how long, but I saw my cousins coming, and they came to give us help, and it was such a relief to see them. I remember they prepared a place for me on the sidewalk, and I just slept there because I was a child, and I was able to sleep. Later on, I heard that as they were waiting for the sun to come up to take my brother to the cemetery, a neighbor, which was not really close to us, we didn't really know him very well, he stopped by and he said, do you have a coffin for him? And my parents said, no, we were planning on just wrapping him in a blanket or something like that. And then he said, just wait for me and see what I can do. Shortly after that, he came back with a coffin. And that was such a sweet expression of charity and of love from someone that we didn't even know. And then after that, we stayed a few days in one of my aunt's neighbor's backyard, and there were many people in there. We were just sleeping out there because we were not there to go into any house because we were afraid that something would happen. And I remember laying down, looking at the stars at night and still thinking, what is going on? When will I wake up from this? A couple of days after that, after everything happened, my aunt came to me with a present. And I remember looking at her and thinking, why are you giving me a present? It's not my birthday. And she said, today is Christmas. And I remembered. I had totally forgot that Christmas was coming. But she helped me to remember. And for the first time, I cried. I cried because I think that I realized that it was real. That it was not really a nightmare, that it was really happening. I remember that there were some trucks that will pass by and they will give us water, and another truck will pass by and they will give us food. And I know that all that came from people from all over the world that came to help us. During that period, it was amazing to see all the help that we received from strangers. Even though I didn't understand back then the concept of charity, I was able to feel the love from those people that helped us. And my gratitude was always there. I was not yet a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Back then, I really didn't know much about the plan of salvation. I just knew that my brother was dead and that he was probably in heaven, but I really didn't know exactly what had happened to him. And I wondered many times if I was going to be able to see him again. I remember having that question and that longing in my heart. What happened to him? Where is he? Where did he go? Will I see him again? When I was 11 years old, my mother had a baby, which was my baby brother. And he was a reason for joy for us, but it was very hard. I remember that sometimes we would just be sitting in the living room after, and my mother would just start crying for no reason. And I knew that she was hurting inside because she didn't know exactly what had happened to my brother. It was maybe about 2 years after the earthquake that I started having some kind of daydream, because I would think about my brother many times, and I remember thinking, where is he? Will I see him again? And then I started having this daydream in which I would see him come to our door, knock on our door, and then I would go and open the door, and then he would be standing right there, and he would tell me, guess what? I'm not really dead. I'm alive. I'm just somewhere else. But I was not allowed to come, but now I can come to you, and I will stay with you, and I will never leave again. And I think that daydream that I had helped me in coping with the pain and the sorrow that I felt. It was more than 40 years after that earthquake in Managua that one day I was doing my dishes. I was in my kitchen, and it was very close to Easter time. And during that time, we talk about the resurrection of the Lord, and I was just reflecting on that, thinking about the resurrection and all that it means to us. And then for some reason, I started thinking about my brother. And at that moment, it finally hit me. And I remembered that daydream, that fantasy that I had about him coming to me after he was dead. And then I realized that it was not a fantasy and that it was not a silly thing, because through all those years, I never told anybody about that, because I always thought that it was silly, that it was just me, my imagination. But then I realized that it was really the light of Christ that came to this little girl who needed comfort at that moment of her life. That was really revelation about the beauty of the resurrection, that my brother was somewhere else, that his spirit is not dead, that he is alive, and that one day we will be able to be together again, and then we will never separate again. And for me, that moment was a moment of glory and just joy and gratitude. How merciful the Lord was with me, that He allowed me to see that at that moment in my life when I needed it. After I turned 15 in January 1979, my parents gave me a present, and it was to be able to go to the United States to visit my aunt in New York. So I went there, and I spent a few months in there. My aunt made the arrangements so I could go to this school that it was really like an adult school, but it was amazing because I was there the whole day learning English. And it was a great experience for me. But in Nicaragua, there had been some kind of political unrest that had been going on for years, but it was getting worse and worse. And the news were just terrible. I was so worried about my family. I was just 15, and I really didn't want to be away from them while they were going through these hard times. When I went back to Nicaragua, things were getting really bad. Because there had been these rebels that had been fighting for years to throw down the government. there was a point in which they decided to bomb that part of the city to put more pressure on the rebels so they would leave. At that moment, all the radio stations in Nicaragua were censored. They were shut down. So we didn't know exactly what was going on. But then at night, we would try to listen to the radio stations from Costa Rica. And they would tell us, what was going on and how many people had died that day, how many families. And I knew that there were children dying from that. And then again, the next day it would happen again. And we would just watch that in horror. At night, we would put our mattresses on the floor and we would sleep there just hoping that we will be safe from the bullets. And I remember thinking, okay, there are people dying. There are children dying right now. And I will ask in my heart the question, why does God allow this to happen? Why doesn't He do anything to stop this? And it was very hard. I was not upset with God, but I just had that question, in my heart. Fortunately, something happened and the problem stopped and the president left the country. I remember vividly that day after the president of the country left and the rebels were just celebrating out on the streets the victory. I think I have never lived another day like that in which everybody was just happy, feeling this joy that our problems were over. When I was about 16 or 17, I started attending college. And I went to Universidad Centroamericana, and my major was in industrial engineering. I always liked learning and, getting an education. And it was a good school, but the situation in Nicaragua was just getting worse and worse and worse. So in 1984, I decided to marry a young man that I was dating. I had been dating him for years, and we just decided to get married. And we moved to San Francisco, California, where we both had family. My mother and my siblings came to join us like a year after I left. But, it was not easy to start a new life in a new country because of the language, the climate. And even though we had work, we were blessed to have work. We always had work. And for about 2 years in my marriage, everything was fine. We had a baby around 2 years after we got married. It was our son, Javier, who was born there. And he gave me a reason to keep going and to have hope for the future. When our son was like 6 months old, my husband lost the job that he had that was very stable. And I really don't know how everything started. He, even from the time we were dating, I knew that he drank alcohol and that he even smoked a little bit of marijuana. But it was never too bad. But after he lost that job, like 2.5 years into our marriage, things just went downhill from that moment. After that, he tried to get a job. He could not find a job, and he just got into drugs heavily. So those years were very hard, very, very hard. To see him going down and down, little by little. And having this fear and having this love for my son and knowing that I needed to protect him and that it was my responsibility to look after him. I looked for jobs in which I could actually take my son with me so I could make a living and be with him at the same time. So I would work as a nanny during the day and I went to school at night because I always wanted to expand my education, to have a better future. It was very hard for me to see the man that I loved, the father of my son, going into that trap. And I remember that there were times even when I would see him on the street and I would stop him to talk to him and he wouldn't even recognize me. He didn't know that it was me He was totally lost.
They come to see me.
I tried to help him. I tried talking to him. I went to therapy. I went to Alcoholics Anonymous organization to look for help. I tried to do everything that I could to help him. But I feel that I was failing. I could not help him. One evening, I remember walking to the bus stop because I was going to school. And then I forgot something, a book or something. I needed to go back to our apartment to get it. So I walked back to my apartment. And as I was getting close to it, I noticed that there was a car parked right in front of it. And I noticed that it was full of men. There were at least 5 men inside that car. And it was full of smoke. And for some reason, I looked closer and I thought, what are they doing? And then when I looked inside the car, there was a little boy in there. And that boy was my son, my baby. And I got so upset. I banged on the window and I opened that door and I told him, give me my son. This is the last time that you do this to him. So that day was the day when I decided to end my marriage. I think that was the day when I actually stopped loving my husband, because I realized that I could not trust him. I could not even trust my son to him. It was very hard to end the relationship. How do you do that, after being so many years with a person? Those days after he left, of course, it was better without him, but at the same time, I had fear. I feared that he would come back. I feared that I would not be able to give my son a stable environment, that he could also fall into that trap as he would grow up. And I was desperate. I was hopeless. It was really hard. Those days were times of despair for me, not knowing what to do. People make choices. And that freedom to make choices comes from God. He has given us that freedom. And that is why He cannot stop people from doing bad things. And I know that it happens in our life sometimes, that we have these longings, we have these questions, we have these things that we don't really know the reason. But if we are patient, the answer will come one day. And then we will finally have that peace that we are looking for. It was in 1989 when I separated finally from my first husband. And it was about 3 weeks after that, and after feeling all this despair, that one day my mother went to visit her sister that lived in San Francisco. And while she was there, a couple of senior LDS missionaries came to my aunt to visit her. And when I came back from work that night, my mother told me, guess what? I met this wonderful couple at your aunt's home, and they invited us to come to church tomorrow. And she said, would you mind coming with me? And since I was, going through that very hard time, I just said to myself, I will go. I really don't have anything to lose. And that was the day when my life just changed. I didn't know what to expect, but the moment that I stepped into that building, I just felt this wonderful feeling of being in a special place. I needed to find peace and solace for my soul. I needed to find a place where I could help my son grow and become a good man. And it was the most amazing feeling. It was a state conference. So I sat in this huge room full of people, everybody just happy to be there. And I sat there and I started listening. And every single message seemed to be directed at me. I felt so much hope by just listening to them. And I just thought, that's exactly what I want. That's exactly how I feel and what I need in my life. When the conference was over, and we were meeting with the missionaries again outside, I just told them, can you please come to my house and teach me more about this? Because I want to know more. I need to know more. So we set up an appointment with the missionaries. So that day, I was really looking forward to meeting with the missionaries that evening. And it was around 5 p.m. And I was at the house where I would take care of this girl. And I was with my son. And all of a sudden, the ground started shaking. So it was another earthquake. And I felt, oh my goodness, what is going on? And I just grabbed, embraced the children and waited for it to stop. And I thought, oh wow, what is going to happen now? I thought I'm sure the traffic is horrible. Maybe some of the street lights are not working, and it's going to take me a long time to do this route that I usually took going home. When I went home, I called the missionaries. And I told them, I'm sorry, but we don't have electricity, and probably it's not a good night for you to be out, so can we postpone our meeting? The missionaries came to our home and they started teaching us, and it was amazing to see that everything that they said made sense and gave me hope. And they were so happy, and I loved the relationship that they had with each other. And I wanted to feel that joy. I wanted to feel that happiness. So about 3 weeks after they started coming to our home, my mother, my brother, and me, we joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we got baptized. That day in which I was baptized was an amazing day. And then receiving the gift of the Holy Ghost and knowing that I could have that gift with me if I was faithful. It was such a feeling of feeling complete and whole and finally being where I belonged. Just a few days after that, I was watching the news and I saw that the Berlin Wall had fallen. And for me, that was so significant because it was a symbol of captivity and injustice, and terrible things that were happening. And for me, it was like a signal that my life was going to just be so different from that moment on. So I said, okay, a new life is starting. We were baptized in November. So soon after that, we started singing Christmas hymns and songs in church. And for me, that was so sweet because for the first time in my life, I felt the true spirit of Christmas and the reason why we celebrate Christmas. Something that we do in Nicaragua is that usually we have like a nativity set and we put all the little figures, but there is one that is not there yet, which is the baby Jesus. We usually wait until Christmas Eve at midnight to actually put him there. I remember that day when Christmas Day came after I joined the church, and my son put the little Jesus in the nativity, and just knowing what that little baby came to do, that he came to show us the way, to give an example to us on how we can be, and to suffer for us too. So he could understand our sorrows and our feelings and our tribulations, and so he could extend mercy and love to us if we turn to him. I think that was just an amazing time in my life that gave me an assurance and the hope in the future. Just a few weeks after I was baptized into the church, they extended me a calling, which was to be the Sunday school teacher in the Gospel Principles class. And I was scared to death, I was a new member, but they told me, don't worry, there will always be people there that can help you. And when I was teaching that Sunday school class, one day a young man came. His name was Carlos Aburto. And of course, he was just another person there. But it happened that we became friends. Maybe a year after I met him, I moved to Utah. And after 2 years of living in Utah, I went back during Christmas to see my sister, and I went to church, and I just, had the desire to talk to Carlos because I knew he was a good man, and he was my friend, and I wanted to talk to him about life. We realized that we had a lot of common, that we really liked each other. And I remember during that trip, we had a conversation during hours and hours, and it just felt like being with my best friend. So we started dating. I came back to Utah because that was a very short trip, and we would talk over the phone. And about 2 months later, he came for a visit. He stayed in Utah for 2 weeks, and that's when we got engaged. I was able to marry him in the temple, and our son was able to be sealed to us, which was a beautiful moment when the three of us were kneeling in the altar, starting that eternal family. After that, we had 2 children. He is a miracle in my life. That's the way I see him. He's a good man. He is faithful in the church. He loves serving in his callings, and ever since, he has been my best friend. It hasn't been easy, but we have had a beautiful marriage. I remember the story of this cathedral in Germany that was destroyed during one of the world wars. And then the people in this town, in this city, actually rebuilt that church. And you can see in the church right now how some of the bricks are black because they are the original bricks that were burned during the bombing. And then I realized that my life is like that church. I have gone through very hard times. The scars are still there. The consequences, the pain is still there. But the Lord has rebuilt my life and has allowed me to have joy in this life through His tender mercies and through the atonement of our Lord. I know that He is our Savior and our Redeemer, that He is the source of peace and healing. And now I have the opportunity to be a leader for the women of the church and of the world. And they can see that we all go through hard times. We all have tribulation in our life, but that God is mindful of each of us. He's mindful of me, and He's mindful of each of us, and that He is always extending His arms of mercy and love towards us so we can turn to Him and have a better life.